Hey everyone, this is Christy Ray, and welcome back to Website Success. I'm doing another interview here. This seems to be becoming a habit, which is a good thing. And today I am talking with Eve Simon. She is the founder and chief creative at Eve Simon Creative. Before she started Eve Simon Creative, she spent 13 years in the agency world working with just about every platform out there. And she went out on her own in 2020 to work with small businesses and tech agencies to help them build out their design and storytelling practice. And just a little add on there, I have known Eve for, I think, 20-ish years, 20 years. And we have worked together on quite a few projects. So I'm very excited to talk with her because she is my favorite designer ever. So Eve, welcome. And if there's anything you'd like to add to that intro, please do.
No, that's awesome. And I think it's more than 20 years. I don't want to
I
give us a
know.
number. We worked together. We actually met through DC Web Women back in the
Mhm.
day.
Mhm.
And then you came on with various companies I worked for as a contractor.
Yep.
And then once I went out on my own, there was no question when I was doing sites where I couldn't build because I'm a designer, a storyteller, not a techie. There
Mhm.
was absolutely no question that we could partner together. And we've been doing it ever since I started. So
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
Thank you. Thank you. So I brought Eve on because, like I said, she's my favorite designer. I've worked with her on numerous projects over the years. I think it's been since the 90s. I want to say it's like late 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a little
Yeah.
while. Uh, I've known Eve longer than my son has been alive, and he's almost 19. So
And I remember when your son was born.
yes.
So
Yes, it's been
Lord.
a while. But again, the reason that I asked her on is because she knows so much about design. She's worked with so many different kinds of organizations. So I thought she would be really good to kind of pick her creative brain to see what she has to say about design. And this is a topic that a lot of people have trouble with. So I guess Eve, the big question, my first question is when you're getting ready to make a website. So let's say that you're DIYing it or you're maybe thinking of hiring somebody, but you're just getting started. What should you plan for before you get started?
This is a controversial question, I will tell you, because I don't want to say age, but I'm OG. I'm an OG designer. I've been doing this for over 25 years. For me, when you get started, I don't like to jump right into the pretty stuff
Hmm.
because that doesn't help you in the long run. And this is something that clients of all sizes, when I worked at an agency and we were working with a $250,000 project for a big name nonprofit versus now I work with an independent person for considerably less, you got to do the unsexy stuff first. And every website's going to start with goals and audiences. You can make art without that, but you can't design something functional without knowing those two things. And by that, I mean, why are you doing it and who are you doing it for? It's just really that basic. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be a big fancy document. It doesn't have to be, you know, all that stuff. It just needs to be, what are you trying to achieve with this? Because obviously you're doing it for something. And if you're not, go read a book because it's a lot of work if you don't have a reason to do it. And
Right.
then who is it for? You're going to get a very different outcome if you're doing it for a nonprofit audience than maybe Coca-Cola, or you're going to be doing it to get clients versus you're going to do it for individual students, for example. So you got to get all that out of the way. Figure out your goals and audiences. And then what I've learned in this industry is you got to figure out your story. And story has a lot of different words. You can call it brand, you can call it story, you can call it your personal journey, whatever it is. Your story is going to determine a lot of the goals and the audiences as well.
Hmm.
But without it, you got no structure. I'm one of those people who feels that structure makes you more creative. So if you have guardrails and
Hmm.
you're going to do this to this and you're achieving this, then you can fill in with all the different colors and all the pretty stuff. But if you don't have a structure and it's open-ended, then you're going to be in trouble. So I
Right.
figure out who it's for, figure out what you're doing, figure out what you're trying to say, what your story is, and what your selections of structure. When we talk about navigation, you've got to know what pieces are going to build your story.
Hmm.
Unlike a lot of print pieces, When you open a magazine and you see things in order, you don't see a website in order. So you got to assume that people are going to have to know about you coming in from different places. So that's also something to think about. That gets more complex. Only then can you start really thinking about the pretty stuff. You got to think about structure and intent and all that. Once you get into the pretty stuff, that's what people call brand. I call story, but it's brand. But knowing what colors represent you is probably one of the more challenging things you can do at this phase of the game. Because if you haven't done the unsexy work, you may just think it's a preference.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, I like purple. I mean, I'll tell personally, I love purple. If I had my druthers, every site I did would be purple. But I'm a designer. So my job is not my personal thing, it's for someone else. It gets tricky when you are the someone else doing your own
Right.
website. So picking these things and picking these intents from a position of not personal preference, but maybe business need or business preference is going to be the biggest challenge I think you have when you get started. You may not know what your typography is. You may not know what the right fonts to choose from. You don't know the colors are, but every selection that you make should have an intent and a reason in my mind. There are
Mhm.
going to be a lot of designers who will tell you opposite, and you start with the pretty and all that, and you back into the other stuff. But for all the work that you and I have done over 20 plus years, we know what happens at the end when you do that, which is it doesn't achieve anything, or suddenly they're like, oh, we need to add something, which would have been much easier in the beginning.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'll add a little plug here because I do have on Website Success Academy in the resources, I've got a website success blueprint that basically covers a lot of what Eve just talked about as far as the upfront stuff. So it goes into, first of all, what is your offer? What are you trying to do like in the first place? Not even your
Exactly.
goals yet, but what is your offer? What are the features and benefits of your offer? And then what are your goals? Who is your target audience? Creating an ideal client avatar and thinking about what does that ideal client need to see in order to work with you. So even
Yeah.
thinking about what your content is going to be before you get to even think about what your logo is going to look like or which colors you're going to use. But that's for me, that's like the third phase. So because I usually do
Yes.
planning and then content and then the design. So that's
Right.
you got to wait to actually come up with the brand and the design. Before you have to have those other things in place first.
And some people may not like to hear that. It's hard to hear, but and it can also put off somebody saying, oh, I'm not a designer, or oh, this is too much work to do. I guarantee you that you will reap the benefits, even if it's the world's most simple site, because then it'll
Mhm,
be fast. In theory, then you just get some quick answers. You know what you need to do, and you have a blueprint
mhm.
and those guideposts to help you through it. It's probably a very controversial thing for a visual person to say, don't jump right into the visual.
Mhm.
But I think it'll be easier for most people who are listening here to get some of that stuff out of the way and actually build some confidence in yourself and in what you're doing. It's like, oh, I do know what I want to do. And
Mhm.
then within that process, some ideas will come at you, which include color and maybe include imagery, maybe include typography,
Mhm.
but you sort of can't jump right to it. So
Right.
thank you for having an entire set for that, because not everybody wants to think that way.
Yeah, yeah. And I will add that for anybody that's having trouble getting started with figuring all that out, if you at least know the basics, if you've got like some inkling of what you need as far as like what your offer is and just kind of some rough idea of who your target audience is, you can use AI to help you refine that. You can use ChatGPT or Claude.ai and you can bounce ideas off of it and say this, this is what I think. Can you expand on it? Can you tell me what you think their challenges and pain points are? And you obviously want to confirm that with real humans and make sure that it's accurate. But in my experience, it's pretty good at guessing that kind of information because it's been trained on a lot of the information that's on the internet. So I found it to be pretty good at figuring out. At least the paid versions that I'm using are pretty good. I haven't even tried it with the free version, but it's worth trying it out if you need somebody or something to bounce those ideas off of to figure that
Think
out.
that's also a good point too, because sometimes you can feel very isolated and very
Mhm.
alone when you're doing this. while AI scares the hell out of me sometimes, this is an interesting use of it where you can actually bounce things off of somebody who's not going to judge you.
Mhm,
And it also builds your confidence saying, I don't know what I'm talking about. Well,
mhm,
when you put these things in, AI is going to tell you, you do know what you're talking about
mhm.
and then help you refine that. So I think that that's actually, if you're sitting by yourself and it's like, I can sit and talk to myself, or I could talk to an AI,
Yeah.
maybe that is a helpful approach to some of the stuff.
Yeah. And I think it's really good because a lot of at least a lot of the people that I work with, they're solopreneurs. They're working independently. It's just them.
Yep.
And they may not really have somebody to bounce ideas off of all the time. They might, they might have a business bestie or somebody that they can talk to, but I work from home. I am in my basement in my office and some days I don't even leave the house. Some days I don't go anywhere. And so sometimes it helps to have that AI. I do actually run the things past humans that are in the target audience to sort of confirm what the AI is telling me. Because sometimes AI makes stuff up. It is known to do that. So
Yes.
you got to be careful, but
Be
it's
careful.
good to have that when you're working independently, to
Yeah.
have that
I
sounding
I
board.
I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. I like when you say talking about running past people in your target audience because that's going to determine so many things because you do have to teach an AI some things. And then if you ask like your mother, what do you think about this? She'll be like, "Oh, darling, it's wonderful."
Yeah.
But that's not your audience who's going to say, "You know what? That color actually grosses me out and is like
Right.
or that's not what I mean." So I think that that's maybe a very good step. And then that builds your confidence in saying, "Okay, well, I've determined who I need to talk to now."
Mhm.
But I do think you need to make that next step to talk to somebody.
What would you say is a good process? I know we kind of talked about it sort of high level, but what are some other things that people should do before they get into creating their brand? And then maybe a little bit of what they should do when they get to the point of creating their brand.
This is also going to be controversial because you got to pick a platform.
Hmm.
You got to kind of know how this is going to go out in the world. And normally, when you're also picking a platform, you've got to think about your presence. And that's a URL. So that's a www.evesimoncreative.com. What is it? How are people going to get to you? So again, maybe that's again the unsexy stuff, but understanding how it's going to be built on what and how people get to it. I think that's probably the first thing that goes in your mind with all this other stuff. And it helps with story. It helps with, I could have made myself not Eve Simon Creative. And I actually went back and forth over, do I name a company? Is a company name for design stuff
Hmm.
with just me because I'm a solopreneur. And then finally it's like, then, you go through the process saying, you know what? No, I'm going to do this. And because I'm a visual designer and WordPress scares me, which is why I work with you so much and I send you projects that are built on WordPress. If I'm going to build this myself, I got to use a platform that I'm comfortable with that works with my designer brain and is
Hmm.
suitable to my skills, which we can get into later, which one I chose. So I think that that's an important piece to figure out, like, how is this going to be done? Because the worst thing is that you go do all this other stuff and then you're like, now what? How do I get it out of here out of your brain? Sorry, I'm pointing to my head, to the screen, and that can be daunting if you're not in this industry. So it's a small step to be able to say it's a small step, but a big step. It's a small thing to say, I'm going to do it on Squarespace and my URL is going to be X. Dude, you've done a lot already. So small is big. And congratulate yourself for doing things like that. So that's how I would start is to think again, that's how my brain works. I think holistically about the whole thing. And
Hmm.
I think about what we're trying to achieve and then sort of whittle yourself down to specificities, which get into visual design, but don't go right at it.
Right.
And do the things that make you comfortable and where your skills live. Be comfortable asking for help from people who are the experts. I think that's something important for a DIYer who sometimes thinks, well, I'll just figure it out.
Hmm.
And most of the time you can, but you're gonna hit something you can't. How many times
Right.
have I sent you an email that says, how do I do this?
Yeah. Yes.
What is this?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
am I wrong to think this? But it takes a while in this industry, and it takes a while, maybe if you DIY, it's your first project to gain that confidence. So I think anything you can do that is within a comfort level that you can do and put a stake in the ground is a step further down the road. And you
Right.
can, then if you don't.
And I will throw in here, choosing your platform, so whichever website builder you're going to use, that's a really big thing. And it's a really hard decision for a lot of people to make. So if you've done that, bravo. You've done one of the hardest things that you've had to do. But I want to make sure before you pick your platform that you've done the research to figure out if the platform is going to work for you for at least a little while. It doesn't have to work for you forever, but it should work for you for at least in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
And you need to make sure that it will do everything that you think you're going to need to do in the next couple of years as
Yeah.
far as the website. It doesn't have to do everything. I know I've worked with a lot of clients and a lot of potential clients who they want to pick a system that does everything. So it does their website, all of their courses, their membership, their email marketing, and their CRM. And I'm not a fan of putting everything, like putting all of your eggs into one basket, because if you have a platform that does everything, it probably doesn't do everything really well. It
Nope.
probably does like one or two things really well, and then the rest of it doesn't do very well. So you might need to pick like sort of the best in class for each of those things. And that's tricky. That it's hard to find that, especially if you don't have the experience. So definitely do your research, talk with experts. I'm available if anybody wants to bounce ideas off of somebody besides AI. I'm here to help. So
And
yeah.
she's definitely not an AI. I will
Are you
I will tell
sure?
you that.
Are you sure? Yeah,
Unless
I'm
you
probably not.
become an AI over 20 years, you didn't start
Yes.
as one.
Yeah, no, I didn't start as one. Yeah, we've actually met in person, so yeah. There is that. Yes. As part of the process, because I've worked with I've worked with other designers, don't let
I
Eve know.
know.
But I've I've worked with designers who want the content done before they do any design, and I've worked with designers who want to do the design before they do the content. Which do you fall into?
Oh. I'm gonna give you the answer that you're gonna hate and that your listeners are hate. It's gonna depend. It
Yeah.
depends on how much content you have. It depends on how much you already have and need to be rewritten. I mean, there's something that's out there called content audit that helps you determine if you have an existing site that you're redesigning. This is based on a redesign. What's gonna stay? You determine sort of stay, go, rewrite, and there are technical challenges to the go part
Mhm.
that we will deal with in another time. I am of the mindset that however it happens, you need your content by the time the website is ready to be tested. How you do that can vary. If you do all the content up front, and that's the writing, and that's even going back to the high level, what are your buckets? Is there an about section? Is there case study section? Is there services? What are all the things that are going to be part of that? Sometimes from a design perspective, it's good to have a estimate of amount of text, like when you're designing something that's going to have an image and a promo,
Mhm.
but you've designed a promo that's a paragraph. The content comes back 3 paragraphs.
Mhm.
That's a problem. So you want to get some of that crap out of the way. So you need to know sort of relative sizes. And if it means you use a placeholder, which I'm not a huge fan of, I'm a fan of using real content. But if you have to use a placeholder until that content is finalized, so be it. But it should duplicate the general size, how much you're going to need to do. You
Mhm.
and I both know that the thing that holds up website launches more than anything else isn't technology, isn't design, it's content.
Oh yeah.
And it's people who realize by the time the site gets to them to test that, like, oh, I need to write stuff.
Yep.
So 100%, it needs to be done early on in this process. How it's done can vary based on where you are in the process. If you're in a brand new website, I would say you probably write it first. If you're
Mhm.
coming at it from a redesign, I would say get the content audit down so you know what's staying, what's going, what's going to be rewritten, what the approximate lengths are before you hit design.
Okay.
Sometimes there are multiple processes that can be done simultaneously. So if you're the type of person, it's like, okay, I'm going to go, we're all in agreement to where we're going. I'm going to go to the right and visually design it. You're going to go to the left and write the stuff.
Mhm.
We'll come back together when the site is getting to be built and then we'll plug it in.
But if
So
you're
there's,
doing it on your own, you got to do one of the other first. Or, I mean, you could split it and you
yeah,
could do a little bit of one and then a little bit of another and then going back and forth. I don't recommend doing that
I don't
personally.
either. I don't
Yeah.
either. I think it's so so we'll amend that. So then if it's by yourself, I say you got to do at least the first draft of your content
Mhm,
before you design.
mhm,
At least the first draft. And understanding content on a Word document or in a Google page or whatever it is very different than when you put it on your website. And suddenly you put it in your website and you go, oh, that's what that means. So there may be round two or round three where the content's edited on your platform.
mhm.
But if you don't have something, you can't edit it. So if you're by yourself and you got no one else to help with, and you're not dealing with a solopreneur who's helping you moderate this, and they're off to design and you do the copy, in that case, I would say get that first draft done first.
Mhm.
And it can be helpful. It's like when you do your structure and understand what your pieces are going to be, start writing and start pulling, looking for your sources, saying, God, I don't have that. Maybe that's in my resume, or maybe
Mhm.
it's on my LinkedIn bio. Start pulling and literally just cut and paste, just get it down on paper, and then you can refine it. I mean, that's just the writing process, which can be, again, daunting if
Yes.
you're not an author. uh, Take breaks. I will advocate for that throughout all of this, that if you're feeling overwhelmed, just walk away and and have a glass of water or do
Mhm.
something, and then come back to it and it'll feel more manageable. But take it to appreciable chunks. And this can be a big chunk. This is maybe the center part of your website, more so than visual design, which is hard to hear if you think that design is going to solve everything. A beautiful coat of paint and lipstick on a pig will solve everything. It's your content that's actually making the difference.
Right.
So
Right.
getting that under your belt, if you're starting from scratch, getting that under your belt is a good place to start. So you've
Absolutely.
turned me around.
Yeah. Yeah. And even so even when I work with clients that where I build the website for them, we when we're doing a project where we're only doing the build for them and they're providing us with their graphics, their design, their colors, their logo and everything, they've already got all that. The content, that's a lot of times the hardest part for them, but we won't actually start building anymore until they've delivered their content. So we'll give them templates to put all their content into. I give them Google Docs to put all their content into, and I'll create a sitemap for them and tell them which pages they need to write and give them
Yeah.
the templates have instructions for writing what kind of content needs to be on each type of page, like your about page and your services page and things like that. But I will not push one pixel until they have delivered their content because I've worked with clients. I've got a client right now who was supposed to deliver, it's currently July. They were supposed to deliver their content in, I think it was April, and we were supposed to launch their website in June, and I still don't have their content.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I'm still waiting on it.
And the point there's well taken, because even if they say just go, well, I'll work on it, just get it ready, it's still not going to launch, guys.
Mhm,
You're still going to have even if they're, which is difficult to build when you don't even have a sense of what the content is,
mhm,
because you don't know if it's going to be 3 paragraphs or 2 lines.
right.
So know that the end result is the same. If you wait till the very end to get your content, your website's going to be on hold anyhow. So you
Mhm,
might as well just do it in the deadlines that are. It's hard. I 100%. It's a hard thing to do. And again,
right.
it's the same kind of brain thing. Like some people can't do writing and think that writers have to do writers. If this is writing, this is about you. You should be able to get your story out there. And one thing I will say here too, which is also saying a lot of controversial things, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. And this is going to be throughout the process. This is in design. This is in writing, because I know people who get paralysis when they can't finish something. Just get it done.
Yeah.
It's a first draft. Actually, the guy who ran the Washington Post called reporting the newspapers the first draft of history. I mean, so even they have a first draft.
Mhm,
Get the first draft done, and then there can be changes down the road.
right. And
But you have to.
yeah, and one thing to remember about a website is that it's updatable. You can
For sure.
change the content after you've launched. So like you said, it doesn't need to be perfect. You just need to have it and have it be good enough. to launch. And then if you want to make it perfect later, you can do that and you can update it. It's not like a printed document where you put it out there and it's out there as it is forever, unchangeable until you go through it with a marker or something, or print a new version of it. But it's relatively easy for most websites to change what the content looks like. So definitely need
And
to get it up there.
get it up there.
Yeah.
And the codicil to that is, you just mentioned about updating. Websites should never be done.
Mhm, mhm.
So if you say, "Phew, that's done," we got to have a conversation because it's a starting point. And the beauty of all these digital things, because one, you can change things, but two, you can put it out there and test it. So do it the first time and say, okay, here I am. And they go, oh, I thought you did X. Oh, I forgot about doing that. Or I thought that you're more positioned like this. You then can start making refinements. And
Mhm.
then in 3 months, 6 months, maybe there's at some point you have a plan when you feel strong enough to do it, of how frequently you're going to change it. Maybe there's like, I just was interviewed by Fast Company for something about my podcast. And I made sure that before that was released, I made some changes to the website because it
Mhm.
had advanced from that period of time. And it was going to be something that people were going to see. And I wanted to refine the story a little bit. But that had been up like 3 years and it was time to make a couple tweaks. So you're the audience or whoever's going to see your website, because if we do this right, it is a marketing channel amongst other marketing channels that drive people to it. People are going to see this and they're going to have opinions, and you got to encourage that and
Mhm.
know that the next step is just phase 2, and then there's phase 3, and then there's scalability to infinity kind of thing.
Now, if somebody is DIYing their brand, their website, they're just trying to DIY everything, do you think that it would help them to have a brand board or a brand guide or something like that, where they're creating a document that sort of documents everything about their brand? And if you think it's a good idea, how would somebody that's DIYing it go about making one of those?
These are also very good questions. Brand nomenclature gets weird because when you have a branding agency, they're going to use everything with brand in front of it. They have a brand board, they're going to have a brand document, a brand vision, they're going to have all this stuff. Website design gets a little different because there's a lot of feel when it comes to engaging with a digital product that way. So for me, when I'm working with my clients, more often than not, I do something that I call a mood board. And I find that even the nomenclature of that eases people's minds just a little bit, because it doesn't have to be scary, and it reflects a feeling. It doesn't need to reflect specificity. For me, sometimes I go into a couple details like I need to know what your headline's going to look like, or what does a button look like. But for the most part, those come in at the dead last. It's
Mhm.
all about what is the environment. I think this is a good time for me to mention that my training is actually in theatrical lighting design. So that might help in why I do it this way, because I came from a background where everything was literally air
Mhm.
and there was nothing that you could touch. So how do you make a feeling when there's nothing you can touch? Which is an interesting challenge on the web. So I found that mood boards do that. For me, I do them in Photoshop. I do them in, you can do them in Figma. You can do them in a lot of things that you can start taking digital pieces and start combining them. I'll give you one example that I had recently with a client that changed her mindset about what the website needed to do. That she felt that she had a very nostalgic, old school feel to her. And that is typified for her in like colors and photos and faded things and pearl necklaces and a black and white polka dotted dress by the seaside. There was this things that felt that way. But as a designer, when you look at that, it feels too on the nose, because then you go to a website and go, oh, she's talking, maybe she's selling something that's nostalgic, versus it's her soul out there
Mhm.
that is nostalgic. So the process of doing a mood board together actually solidified that for her,
Mhm.
because the pictures that I chose were of her. She actually did a photo shoot. That's another thing, that sometimes content can be written, but content can be visual. So she had done some photos that reflected who she was by the sea in this dress with her pearls on. And then it was mixing that with things the colors that felt older, that didn't feel bright and modern, that felt older but still relevant. all these things. And it took a little while, and it doesn't have to come to you right away. I did the walk away thing a couple times. Typography that fits old school, but yet she's now, 2024. And so once I did that and I showed it to her, she was like, I get it now, that I don't need to have that level of specificity. I can suggest it.
Mhm.
And so like little things like type treatments or photo treatments ended up like Polaroids. And the pictures in the Polaroids were faded a little bit because that gave us a little bit of the feeling, but didn't have to say, I'm an old picture. So the mood board got us probably 3/4 of the way, because then I could follow the feeling of that board when it came to actually, I built the site in Squarespace for her.
Mhm.
But if we hadn't done that, all I would have had in my head was she wants nostalgia. She wants something that feels homey and comfortable. That doesn't mean anything until you actually see it. So
Right.
I will always do a brand board. I will always do a mood board rather. Brand boards are a little different because they get to the specificity of who you are, sometimes through logo and type. They do color palettes. It can be very, not technical, but I think it's a little scarier, especially if you're a
Mhm.
DIYer. Now, if you
Mhm.
don't have access to Photoshop, you can do it in Canva. A lot of
Mhm.
people are using Canva. You can also just go get magazines and tear things out and get a piece of paper and just put them down and start seeing what works for you.
Mhm.
And maybe then that moves digital at some point. There's lots of different ways to do it, but I think it's an important step to start getting, once you get sort of the unsexy stuff out of the way, get your visual stuff on the table somehow. And
Right.
I think a mood board is a really good way to do it, to get started with it.
Okay.
Now, if you come at it with something that's already defined, like I actually have a client right now who had all of his stuff done. He has colors, he has a logo, he has a feeling, but it's again a little on the nose. And I'm in the process of doing a mood board with him to try to find a way to pull things out. So we're not looking so deep down to specificity. He's a coach that has a very sort of spiritual sense to himself purposely, but not putting the spirituality on the client. And it came out in a meeting that he's like, oh, so when I put something that's like, is a beautiful sunset or somebody sitting by the sea, they think I'm selling things that are based on that. They don't
Mhm.
believe that I'm selling this overall holistic feeling. And it suddenly a thing went off in his head. And he's like, okay, we can't be that on the nose. It has to be something that we find the way into it slightly differently, which
Right.
doesn't mean we abandon it. So this is an important stage to start sussing that stuff out. And again, each of these could be difficult. I'm not going to say they're not. But once you're past it, you'll look at all the things you have. And then actually doing the final work is less onerous because you've already made decisions whether you realize it or not.
If somebody doesn't have their logo, their colors, their fonts, or anything like that, do you think it would be helpful as part of the process of creating those? Because again, they're probably going to DIY or DIY some or all of it. Do you think it would be helpful to do that mood board before they even do that process where they create the logo and everything like that?
Yes and no. Sometimes one can inform the other.
Mhm.
Sometimes you can sort of say, oh, wow, now that I've determined that it's not the Pearl nostalgia, but it's a different kind of nostalgia that can determine maybe where your logo goes. More than not, if you're DIYing it, you're going to be doing a logo with type,
Mhm.
just picking a type, and that you may pick something because that's what you think it is, and by the time you actually start figuring out some of the other pieces of it, it doesn't fit anymore. So I think that's I hate to leave nuance and I hate to leave this or that. If you feel you can't go right at it, don't. Do the mood board and then maybe back into it. The other thing about that I'm going to say is that the choices that you make at this point shouldn't be arbitrary. And they also shouldn't be driven by your personal preferences. And this is, again, controversy that people are going to come here saying, but it's my website and I want
Mhm.
it to be my stuff. It's your website for an audience. So what does the audience want? What do you need the audience to feel, kind of thing? And when you're starting to pick things, it can start to feel arbitrary, saying, well, I like orange. I guess I'll use orange. Well, maybe that's not the best for how you're presenting your story. So again, better to make those decisions early. Have the fight with yourself early too,
Mhm.
because then it's like personal versus business lets you get that out of the way rather than you're facing down a color picker in your platform and
Mhm.
it says, what are your color palette? And you're like, I don't know, I guess I'll take these five. Everything has a meaning. Color in particular has a meaning. And if you're putting things on your website that at least 3/4 of them aren't there for a good reason, you got to go back and rethink it. You know, the
Mhm.
color choices, frankly, are personal preferences, but then there's also color that means something. So you may love red, but red is the color of emergencies. So if you're going to have all this red on your website, you may not realize that you're pushing people away, then drawing people closer to you because you happen to like red. And that's part of the research too. There are plenty of websites out there that are going to tell you what color means. You
Right.
know, just do a Google and it'll tell you A, how you pick color and how you pick colors that go together, because
Mhm.
there's a ton of color palette software that you can pick, and there's triads and there's complementary colors and there's all these different ways to do it. I actually wrote something for you about color.
Yep. Yep.
It's really, really personal, but it's also got to be brand consistent, and it has to work because they're colors that twitch against each other. They call that vibration. So
Mhm.
you could pick a color, it's like, oh, it looks good together. But when you put it in the context, it's like, whoa, I can't read anything. Or why does my head hurt? Kind of stuff. So do the research and figure out what you're picking and what means what you think it means. If you say, I am here to help people buy better apples, do a research about purchasing. What colors encourage people to purchase? What colors encourage people to feel comfortable? Or what does an apple mean to them? Is it, freshness because it's picked? Is it baked into a pie so it's homey? I mean, there's just lots of stuff, and you'll start winnowing it down based on the research you find. Just be
Right.
patient.
So Eve and I were just talking offline, and we decided she has so much information to share, and I would love to have her share more information than what we've been able to cover in this episode. And I don't want the episode to go too long. So we've decided that we are going to break the questions up a little bit. We're going to have a part two. So let me ask my last question for part one. Again, keeping in mind that a lot of the folks that are listening are solopreneurs, they're doing this by themselves. They're probably going to use a template of some sort.
Okay.
So can you, for anybody that doesn't know, can you explain what a template is when it comes to a website? And what are some of the differences between using a template and a completely custom web design?
Deep breath. Template can be a dirty word because people look at that and they think about like a PowerPoint template where you pick from the thing, and it's um in the web world, it doesn't have to be. Everything is a starting point. So whether you start with a template and refine it, or you're fresh and you design it and then you have to figure out how to build it. For a DIYer, I think starting with a template is probably going to be the safest thing because you can get a site up fast. You can see a bunch of different ways that it's accomplished. And most importantly, with templates, there are usually built-in mobile versions. And if
Mhm.
anybody here who doesn't care and say, just a phone, everything is going to be in a phone. I'm surprised that there's still desktop websites right now in 2024.
Yeah.
So good template are done where they have well articulated mobile versions that you can start with. Everything is a starting point, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think custom design is fabulous if you are set up for it, but it is often reinventing the wheel because it's been done before, and
Mhm.
nothing on the web has not been done before.
Mhm.
So s- take take the win, but don't take it as is. So that's the caveat here, because there's template sites. Like, I personally use Squarespace because the Squarespace, there's Wix, there's Webflow, there's a lot of those that are similar in how they're done. I find that the interface is intuitive for my brain when it comes to Squarespace, and it comes with built-in templates. And you can actually, when you log into Squarespace to set something up, you can select a little icon that shows it as a desktop, or select an icon that says this is what it's going to look like on a phone,
Mhm.
and it allows you to make changes on the phone version that don't impact the desktop version, which, as you know, when you're doing media queries raw, that's a pain in the ass.
Right.
So most of these, like Squarespace, used to be able to they did all these different templates, had different names, and there are different versions of it. And then they all had their own customized color palette with it. They had customized like how images are done, customized typography. They're now doing a version of Squarespace that they're all following sort of one, but then they're modified. So even a template, if you choose a Squarespace template, someone has made a decision about what that is based on one template, pretty much. So at this point, it becomes not even selecting a template, it becomes selecting a style. And much like when you start looking at like a stock site, you look at all those images, the images are done with the intent of a photographer. These templates are done with the intent of the template maker. So I would say if you're going to do this, you're going to do a DIY, pick a template that's pretty close. Some of them will have drop-down menus. Some of them will have big, wide, full bleed images, which is edge to edge. Some of them will not. Pick something that is close. Make sure you look at it in the version, because they'll give you an option to preview in Squarespace, and I assume in Wix and others. Preview it and look at it in the desktop and the mobile, because changes will happen between them. Make sure you're comfortable with it, understanding, if you can, in the back of your mind, that you're probably going to change the type. You're probably going to change the color palette. You're going to do different images, kind of thing. I recently just did a evaluation for somebody who hired a designer who just took a template, left the colors, left the type, left everything positioned where it was, and just subbed in different things. And it, shocker, shocker, doesn't work. I mean, it's a website and it does the things, but her unique content and her story wasn't even close to represented.
Right.
So that's what you don't want. That is a big X-nay on the template, whatever you want to call it. But pick a template that you feel comfortable with. It can be done in WordPress too. There's so many WordPress templates out there. If you're feeling a little bit more daring and you're open to some tech changes, because applying a theme, they call them themes, as you know, in WordPress, is a little more challenging than picking a template, quote unquote, in Squarespace, which is why my brain goes towards that and your brain goes to the other. Know yourself a little bit about where you feel comfortable, but don't push it. If you're going down a road, let's say you're going down the Squarespace things, like that just doesn't, I want to have more control, because that's usually what'll happen. Is if they go with the Squarespace, they want more control. If they go with the WordPress, they're like, I don't want to make all these decisions, or I don't know how to attach it to my domain, kind of thing. Squarespace helps you do a lot of those things. So custom development is a wonderful thing. When you and I have worked on projects, most of that's custom.
Yeah.
And so what'll happen is we'll have all these conversations about the goals and the audiences, blah, 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 blah. We'll figure out the content. And then I've gone off and I've literally designed the pages in Photoshop. And what is a header going to look like? What's a footer going to look like? I will document it for you. I'll make sure you'll say this is, you can go and look at something that says, this is the color, this is the font, this is blah, blah, blah. But then somebody on your end has to freaking go and build it.
Right.
And then you open yourself up to, it's built beautifully on a desktop, but then the mobile still has to be done. And if you haven't had the time and the budget to design the mobile, you're like leaving that decision up to your developer, who's like, I'm going to try that.
Right.
This is what we're for. This is what we're going to do, unless you tell me something specific. So there's a place for both. My gut tells me that it is less expensive and less onerous on yourself to pick a template and modify it from there.
Yeah, I agree. For someone that's DIYing, templates are really the way to go. Don't try to do something custom if you're just getting started. That's my recommendation. And we use templates. So even when we do projects for our small business clients, we've got packages that we do, and we're using templates with those. There's WordPress templates that we show them the library of templates, and we say, pick one that is similar to what you think you want. And just, you got to imagine it with your logo, your colors, your content in there, your calls to action, which we'll talk about in the second episode. But that you got to imagine, you got to use your imagination and think about what it's going to look like with your stuff in there. So,
and I think to that end too, is a lot of people try to get a little fancy. Like I'm on a lot of Squarespace Facebook groups where they're like, I'm using custom CSS, which is cascading style sheets. I'm using custom type. And then they're like, why is my site taking so long to load? Because those things add weight. And most template systems, I don't know how necessarily what's available with WordPress, but with Squarespace, there's a lot of freaking fonts that are available that are in Squarespace. That if you need to go and get a custom font because you have a custom type in your logo or whatever it is, and it's not available, it's not a Google font, because they're mostly Google fonts. At this juncture, as a DIYer, I would stop and rethink it and say, is it really, can I find something close and not DIY that?
Right.
Because that opens up a can of worms, because then I know so many people who do like custom fonts because I have to have X, Y, and Z font. I did a project for somebody whose son-in-law insisted on a certain font and it had to be embedded. And I'm like, here we go. And it didn't work. it's not suited for her content. But in his brand mind, it needed to be connected that way. So there's always going to be discussions with that. But yes, we both agree that
Yes.
starting with a template site, uh, when you pick your platform, starting with a template, but modified.
Yeah.
So, modified. I mean, for you, when you have your packages, they pick their colors. They can put their logo in. They can pick their colors. There's a couple different options they can do. You never want to do something where you don't have an option, and you
Right.
never want to do something that someone chooses for you, and you're square peg round hole because your stuff doesn't work.
Well, thank you so very much. I know we've still got a lot to cover, so make sure you come back for part 2 and listen to Eve's thoughts on things like what are some of the design elements that every website should have, and what is a CTA, call to action. We're going to cover some of those questions and more. Eve, thank you so much for talking with me today and for agreeing to come back for a second round. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Only that I love talking about this stuff. I've been in this industry for so damn long. So I really thank you for giving me the opportunity to babble about some of the stuff. Thank you for the opportunity to do this because I just live and breathe this crap.
Awesome. So everybody, thank you for listening. Make sure you come back for part 2. In a week from this episode, we'll have a part 2. So make sure you come back and listen to it. If you haven't already subscribed, hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're on. Make sure you go to the website. So if you want to check out the website success blueprint that I talked about earlier, or I've got a content planner, working on a brand planner for folks that don't already have their logo and all that stuff figured out. They're all under resources on websitesuccessacademy.com. So again, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.